Alright, so I thought I might film a brew day so we can do I don't know, a virtual shared brew day or something. Hopefully I can get some feedback and criticism on what I'm doing. People might have ideas of how to improve it, or might get some ideas themselves. So I've just got a recipe for what I'm going to be brewing is a Hefeweizen beer. So basic recipe is for 40 liters, so 2 kegs. I have 4 kilos of wheat malt, 5 kilos of American pale malt. That probably should be a German pale malt, but I was a bit cheap. 1 kilo of Munich, and 300 grams of sour grapes just to balance that. And then just one hop addition right at the start, so that's 45 grams of Hallertau. And then the mash profile is a little bit interesting just because I'll have a ferulic acid rest at the start, which should just promote a bit more of production of ferulic acid, which will give more of that clove aroma in the final beer. I was nice and prepared this week, and I actually got my starter going on Monday. So I had a 1 litre starter originally, and I noticed that it didn't have a particularly large krausen. So what I did is after that had sort of been going for a few days, on Wednesday I think it was, I decanted off the top liquid, and I just topped up with a little bit more, just 250 mils extra of wort. And then that one actually I did see a nice little bit of krausen, and that's sort of now passed on Friday, so I'm planning to brew tomorrow. So that's already, I've overbuilt my starter by 100 million cells. It's a Hefeweizen, so I was planning on a fairly low pitch of about 100 million cells as well. So about half of this I will split off and just put into a jar to keep for next time I'm doing a starter, and the other half I will pitch into the beer. So I'll just start that stir plate back up. I've turned it off just so you could actually hear me talking here. Okay, so it's the day before brew day. So what I'll typically do the day before I brew is come in just in the afternoon, and I'll fill up my hot liquor tank. So here I've got water coming in through a water filter, and then coming into my hot liquor tank. And as you can see, I keep a fairly slow dribble with that rate, just to let the filter do its job. So I top that up. At the same time, my temperature controller here, 31 at the moment, but set to 55. So I set that to my strike temperature. This is a fairly low strike temperature, obviously, because I'm doing a Hefeweizen, so I'm planning to come in initially with a ferulic acid rest. But also I'll program that with my initial strike temperature, and I've also got here a timer. So I'll flick that off before I leave and set that to come on a few hours before I arrive. So what that means is that when I come in the morning, my hot water will already be already ready at strike temperature. Before I leave as well, I will just hook up all the hoses and that for my system. So as soon as I get in tomorrow, I can just add the appropriate amount of strike water to the mash tun and start straight away. The other thing I do the day before is just take a half tablet of vitamin C. I couldn't get any unflavoured ones, but it doesn't add too much flavour anyway, and just throw that in as well. So that's a little trick that Cam taught me, and apparently that will just dissolve through, and any extra chlorine or chloramines in there will form particulate and settle to the bottom, so trying to keep those out of our final beer. So I've now hooked all my hoses up. Just a little bit about the system. It's a 3-vessel kegel system. So on the left I've got my boil kettle. In the middle here is the mash and lauter tun. So it has a lautering screen down the bottom of that. And on the right, the hot liquor tank. So it's got an electric just kettle element in there. Also in the hot liquor tank, I've got this copper coil that comes in, coils around and then comes out the top. So that allows me to do a Herms mash, which means I can recirculate through the hot liquor tank for temperature control. In addition to these, I've got 2 pumps, for no other reason than I had access to 2 pumps. So I've got a magnetic drive pump here, which is typically what you'd see in a home brewing system, and also this diaphragm pump, which is actually from an old camper trailer. So the diaphragm pump probably has a bit too much pressure for most things, so I'll use that magnetic pump for my recirculation. So out of the mash tun, I'll come down into that magnetic pump, which will come back up through my copper coil and back in for recirculation. Where that comes back in here, what I've done is I've just taken a little bit of hose and cut slits in it and then blocked off the end. So that's just so you get a smoother flow for the recirculation, a more even flow through the grain bed. I purchased these kegs like this, so I didn't actually make these modifications. I did add the sight glasses to the front, which has been quite useful, and I've changed it around a little bit since. But I quite like the system, quite nice to brew on. So I've just arrived here on brew day, and my strike water was all at temperature. So I've flipped on the diaphragm pump and transferred across 20 litres, actually you can't see the level at the moment, 20 litres into my mash tun. It's come in a little under the strike temperature, which should be 55, so I'm just recirculating back through the mash tun just to get that up to my strike temperature before I pour the grains in. While that strike water is just heating up a little bit extra, I'll just start calibrating my pH meter so that once I mash in, I'll be able to measure the pH and do any adjustments that are necessary. Now also, while that's heating up, I just look at my recipe here and measure out any water additions that I'll need. So in this case, 5 grams of calcium chloride, which I'll add as I mash in as well. Alright, so we've hit our mashing temperature. I've just added my brewing salts into the mash, and now I'll pour in the malt to mash in. So we're brewing Hefeweizen. So the malt bill for this recipe is 5 kilos. This is for a double batch, so for 40 litres. I've got 5 kilos of ale malt, American ale. I've got 4 kilos of wheat, and then 1 kilo of Munich, and then 300 grams of acid malt just to balance out the pH hopefully. So away we go. I usually try and get it a little bit slow so that I can try and avoid any dough balls. And then every couple of kilos, I'll just stop for a second and make sure I've got a nice even mix. No dough balls. And now the initial temperature step here is a ferulic acid rest at 50°C. So because of that, I figured what I might do when I try and raise up to my saccharification step, or however you say that, I might try and add a bit more water. So I've gone for a slightly lower water to grist ratio here of 2 litres for every kilo of grain. Whereas I might normally go for 2.5. So we'll expect a little bit of a thicker mash than I would typically have here. So I've just checked my pH and it's come in at 5.3, so that's right in the good range that you want for a mash. So I've obviously chosen a good amount of acid malt to add to the grist. I just use the calculator in Brewer's Friend and that tends to come out quite accurate for me. And something else I'm experimenting with at the moment is using Iodophor. So you just pop a dot of that down and it's like a deep red color, and then pop into that a drop of your mash water, and any starches in there will go black. So you can see I'm still at my ferulic. So here's a bit of the fresh stuff so we can see the original color. And actually, if you do a little bit of the wet in there and see the color change. So any starches in there, I'm still at the acid rest, so you'd expect everything in there to still be all starchy. And then you can see that those starches and the iodine react and go black. So once that doesn't change color at the end of my mash, I can tell everything's converted and I can start mashing out. Now, while the mash is running, I can start cleaning out my fermenters. So I don't always use caustic as a cleaning agent. I have here this time because I had some more nasty stains. So I've just had for a few days a caustic solution sitting in the fermenter just to sort of chemically scrub it right out. Now that's a very dangerous chemical, so I'll be taking care and using gloves as I empty that solution back out. And I'll just be using Star Sand to give that all a clean off and do the sanitation step, and then I'll close those back up and they'll be ready for the end of the brew day. So my mash has been for about 15 minutes at my ferulic acid rest. It was supposed to be 50C. I did end up overshooting a little and hit about 55 or so. But that's not super important, I don't think, for this step, so I think that's quite fine. And what I'll do now is just bump that temperature up. So a bit hard to do with one hand. Alright, I'm just going to bump that up to 65 and start the temperature rest. And then what I'll do at the same time as it's rising is just pop a little bit more water, probably a few extra litres from the hot liquor tank, which is up at 76, just to help get that temperature rise a little bit quicker. So I've just upped my temperature set point to 65, and at the same time I've just started transferring a little bit more of my hot liquor water over into the mash. I'll infuse probably 4 litres or so. It won't get the full rise, but just to help the process along a little bit. So at the same time also I'm cold crashing my yeast starter. So this will be used for 20 litres of the 40 litre batch today, and the other 20 litres will get a Mangroves Jack's M20. So I'm comparing Mangroves Jack M20 with WLP 380, which is a Hefeweizen strain. I ordered that through Hoppy Days. They had run out of the WLP 300, which is the sort of standard Hefeweizen yeast. But the 380 is apparently a bit more clovey and a bit more banana-y, so a souped up version, which I was actually quite keen to try anyway. So I think that'll be quite an interesting comparison between at least these two. And so I've just hit 65 degrees, which is my saccharification temperature. I forgot to mention before, but every 10 minutes or so I just come through and stir and make sure that all my grains are well mixed and etc. And also, now that I've just hit temperature, I've also just recorded that on Brewer's Friend. So just so I have in my notes that I've hit all my temperatures correctly. So we've, oops, there's a bit wet there, maybe not. We've just done our iodine test, and it looks like all our starches have converted. So we've only been mashing about 40 minutes or so. It looks like we might be able to just demonstrate it again to show. But as you can see, we're not really getting that color change here to a black in there. So what I've done is just knocked the temperature probe up to 76, our mash out temperature. The hot water system's only at 76, so it won't actually get that high, or it'll take a very long time, but we can start raising a bit up to mash out temperatures, and shortly soon we'll start batch sparging. Alright, so this recipe originally called for 50 grams of hallertau. Now, Brewer's Warehouse sells in these 40 gram packets, so I decided to use 40 grams of hallertau and then 10 grams of fuggles left over that I had. So as we're rising to our mash out temperatures over here, I'll just measure these out so I can record exactly what it is that I put in, but I'll use the full packets anyway. So we've got a little bit of bonus hops in that packet. So 45 grams of hallertau, and I probably don't even need these, but I'll just add them in anyway. 11.5 grams of fuggles as well. So we actually might end up a little bit high on bitterness there, but probably not really enough to perceive much of a difference. So we'll go with that for the rest of it. Alright, so our mash has now hit 70 degrees, so that's probably good enough to concentrate our mash out. So what I'll now do is just turn off the output of my recirculation pump, disconnect my sparge fitting, and get that to sit there nicely. Disconnect a little outlet, and turn that back on, so we're just draining now directly into the kettle. And as that drains as well, obviously I haven't got my gas connected up properly, but I usually start to fire the kettle now so I can start bringing that up already to a boil. I do also, as I drain into the kettle there, I just drain into my hop spider, just in the hopes that it does some small extra filtration, but hopefully the mash bed and the watering screen here are doing most of my filtration for me. Okay, so now I've done my initial kettle drain. So I need to sparge with about 30 litres according to my recipe. So I'll split that over 2 sparges. So I'm now transferring 15 litres from the hot liquor tank into the mash tun. I'll stir that, let that sit for about 10 minutes or so, and then drain it, and then we'll do that one more time. So another 15 litres in, leave it for 10 minutes, and then transfer that over. So here I'll just record for my records the gravity, pH and volume of the first runnings, and then I'll also get the gravity and pH of the final runnings, and then before we get to a boil as well, I'll do the volume, pH and gravity of the pre-boil. And just give that a mix. Alright, so now we've got our all our sparges done, and we've come in just over 40 litres, so about 41 litres in the kettle. Now I'm trying to make 40 litres of beer, so to account for boil off, what I do is I actually recover a little bit extra of that final sparge beer that I will just add in through the boil to try and top it back up and keep my my volume up, so I can try and get as close to that 40 litres and 2 kegs out. Now the other interesting thing here is I'm trying to use a little bit less gas. So what I've done is I've just got my gas on low to try and circulate the beer through the kettle. And I'm using a electric element which I've immersed in the top here, which will be providing the bulk of the boiling, and then just a small amount of gas to sort of circulate that through. And then the last thing that's happening here is just using a drill with the mash paddle to keep a mix in here. And what that's doing is just as I hit the boil and we start to get that hot break forming, to try and prevent that from overflowing over the top of the kettle. This just provides some rigorous stirring which helps prevent that hot break from causing a boil over. Uh-oh. Trying to kill the heat. Oh. Turn that off. So, I think we did pretty well in the very small amount of boil over there. I think we've had our hot break now. So, start our timer and add our first and only hop addition that we measured out earlier. And now we have a nice easy boil. So while that's boiling away, what I've done is set up my plate chiller. So out of the kettle comes into one of the plate chiller ports. That comes out into my diaphragm pump. I like to use that one because, as I said previously, it has a higher flow rate. So actually the higher flow rate I feel helps me oxygenate a little bit more as I eventually transfer into my fermenter. And then that comes back up into this little arm. Now I didn't really mention this before, but what you'll see is I've got a bit of a copper pipe that overhangs and comes in at an angle like that. This I actually had when I used to use this little kettle. I had a couple of them. And what I did was, rather than welding in ports into this, I had two of these. One that went right down to the bottom, and the other one which didn't have as much height and was still at the top. And I could use those to recirculate without needing ports. Now I still use this one here. I use the shorter one, and what I do is use it to form a whirlpool in the kettle. So it's pumping back in, whirlpooling, doing a little bit of oxygenation as it chills, and hopefully getting all that trube to settle to the bottom. And then I also use that for transferring into my fermenter at the end, and it comes out with a bit of pressure and blasts against the edge of the fermenter, hopefully doing my oxygenation for me. So anyway, that's the recirculation part that they have for my chilling setup. And now the other side of the plate chiller, initially I connect to groundwater. It flows the opposite direction to my wort. And then this just comes out into a large bucket where I collect all the hot water, and I can use that for cleaning, etc. Now, once I get it down to about 50°C or something, I find that our fairly hot tap water doesn't do a great job at chilling anymore. So at that point, I switch over. This is my old Esky mash tun, and I fill this up with ice water. So just some ice buckets, and I'll usually use a couple bags of ice that I've purchased as well. And I will then recirculate that using my magnetic pump. So water will come out the bottom into the magnetic pump, and then that will eventually replace here, and then that will come back in. So towards the end I recirculate ice water in the opposite direction rather than tap water. So 10 minutes before the end of the boil, I'm just going to add a teaspoon of yeast nutrient. So this probably isn't necessary, but I just add that to just about every brew that I do. So that's half a teaspoon per keg for that I add. And then just starting the recirculation. So starting a recirculation through my chilling lines just to start, have 100 degrees work traveling through those for about 10 minutes just to sterilize everything through the rest of the process. Okay, so we've reached the end of the boil. So I've now hooked up a hose, turned off the kettle, turned off the electric element, hooked up a hose, and we now have coming out of the other end of the chilling plate, boiling hot water coming into this tank. And I can flip. I've popped that temperature probe down into the kettle, and we can just watch that temperature slowly drop. And as that gets to about 50, or as this fills up, then we'll start thinking about recirculating the ice water in here. So that's just about full. We'll have to stop that and start recirculating the ice water soon. And it looks like we're getting down to a bit under 60 Celsius there. Okay, so we now have our ice water coming out into our magnetic pump, and that comes over then into our heat exchange and back out again. So we've got nice flow coming through. Nice flow coming through that. We'll probably need a little bit more ice than this, so I usually need at least an extra one of those big bags of ice in addition to whatever ice water bottles I have lying around. Alright, so I've thrown a bag of ice in. Normally what I do is just break that open and shove the recirculation in there, just so that we know that it's going in, getting cold, and then it'll flow back out into the rest of the water. So we're down to below 50 now, and you can see, I should probably get rid of that lid, that it is doing some of our aeration for us as it comes back in. So the reason we're getting that nice fluffy head is that wort's being aerated in there. So I feel nice and confident in the aeration with this procedure. Okay, so I don't know what the hell is happening here, but this frothy head coming out the top of the kettle is really getting quite crazy, and causing a lot more of a mess even than that small amount of boil over that we had before. So I don't really think there's anything I can do about that. A bit unfortunate, but will mean a bit of extra mopping later. Alright, so we've chilled now down to 25. I'm hoping to get just down sort of below 20 or so before I pitch. But that should be enough because the actual, we're still going to go through our recirculator as we go into the fermenter. So the beer that would be recirculating at the top would actually be colder than that 25, which has been measured at the bottom. So now you can see we're getting still quite a lot of foam dripping out of there. But so I've taken the recirculation out, and I'm now going directly into a plastic fermenter. So what I do is I set it up just sitting around the edge in such a way that the wort sort of flows up over onto one of the handles, again just to try and get a bit of extra oxygenation. As you can see, it's coming out quite foamy, so we should be getting hopefully I believe at least adequate oxygenation in there. Okay, so I'm finished chilling, finished transferring into my fermenters. And so now I'm placing each of those into a separate temperature controlled fridge. And so on each fermenter, what I do is I've just got a wetsuit cooler, which I've taped to the side, and I just slot my temperature probe into the side like that. So you don't get a super accurate temperature reading. I find it tends to be about half a degree warmer. What am I saying? your beer tends to be half a degree warmer than your measured temperature. So each of these fridges I've now got set at 16.5, as I'm hoping to ferment my beer at about 17. And so what so what I'll do now is just do all my cleaning. I've got quite a mess to mop up over here, so I'll do all of my cleaning and just let those temperatures of each of those beers sort of do a little bit more chilling. It looks like they're still a few degrees over fermentation temperature, so I might pitch even if it's still a little bit warm to save me coming back tomorrow to pitch, which is a bit of a no-no, but I'm feeling a little bit lazy. And who knows, maybe for a Hefeweizen that might just stress the yeast a little bit and give me some nicer flavors, but mostly it's just laziness. Okay, so I've just pitched the yeast, the M20 dry yeast, directly without any rehydrating or anything like that, directly into the fermenter, and I've taken my sample as well that'll get the original gravity and pitching temperature and that sort of thing to record. And I'm just now pitching my yeast into the other half. So what I'll do is first decant off the sort of top bit. Now I've got about 200 mils in there. Swirl that up. Half of that will get saved. And the other half pitched. I'll just pop a little bit more of that because I think I got a bit more than half in there. There we go. Seal that back up. And back in the fridge, ready to ferment. Alright, so brew day's over. A few stats out of the day. So I was shooting for an original gravity of 1051. I end up getting a OG of 1055, so a little bit over. I end up with a slightly higher efficiency than I expected. So I usually plan for 65%, and I ended up getting 69%. So that's a bit higher for my brewery, which is good. It's probably quite a low efficiency compared to other people. I'm not sure why I tend to get a bit lower, but at least it's semi-consistent, so that's quite good. And so yeah, ended up with just shy of 40 litres, so I think 39.6 litres or something of beer that'll now ferment away and hopefully keg that in a couple of weeks' time.